First thing I'd like to do is to thank, of course, all of our panelists who came and joined us today, and of course to thank you all who are in the audience with us, as well as the people who I hear are booming in the Twitter sphere. Is that appropriate? Twitter sphere?
Yeah.
Twitterverse.
Twitterverse. All right. I think that I certainly have some general questions and connections that I'd like to make. But firstly, I obviously want to open up questions to the audience at large for any of the panelists who are up here. So if there are any questions that we might have for anyone, if you'd come to the mics at this time, we'd appreciate it.
I have a question.
Sure.
To Dr. Lewis, I noticed when you first...
Can you tell us who you are, please?
Yes.
Just you know.
I am Daniel Black. I'm a professor of African American Studies at Clark Atlanta. I noticed when you first started speaking, Dr. Lewis, you referred to your love for Morehouse and all of her ideals. Why is Morehouse a woman if it's an all-male school?
Phenomenal question, and I don't have a strict answer. I refer to it in tradition as her, and I think it's equally important. I think if we're going to challenge ourselves, maybe we refer to it as him and take some accountability and responsibility and nurture ourselves, right? Nurturing is a concept that black men aren't often allowed to do, so we need to reinstill that. So maybe I'll start calling him dear old Morehouse.
Yeah. And I think that might be important, especially because of how we even want to set up traditional notions of fatherhood. Even it's funny that when we think about all black male excellence, the source is still a woman. And I think that could be important. My second follow-up question to that is, do you think it's important for Morehouse, Morehouse, of course, has sports programs, et cetera. Why do you think it's important, or do you think it's a problem for Morehouse to have female cheerleaders, though none of those students go to this institution, if you address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is that most of the ways in which we engage Spelman is just a straight-up use of patriarchy. Women are objects to be enjoyed on occasion on the weekend during visitation, not necessarily to be taken seriously in our classes, right? That's a whole different gender dynamic. But we continue to not have a meaningful relationship with our sister school, Spelman, and allow certain practices. While I respect and honor the right to folks to be cheerleaders, I would like to see some deeper actual ties between the institutions. I can imagine that probably comes strictly out of a tradition of using women and picking women for our enjoyment.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Gregory. I'm a junior sociology major from Nebraska, and yes, there are black people there as well. I guess I had a question for all the panelists, but this is more directed towards you. As far as the media, why aren't black males being highlighted for going to school? But they may, like on 106 and Park, there may be an occasional, oh, this young man got accepted into college, but they don't have any positive shows that are highlighting young black males in college, except we have College Hill. Or we have something that kind of depicts the negative version instead of us who are busting our butt here at Morehouse and other places. Why don't you think they highlight us?
I mean, the short answer is I think it's about entertainment. And what is depicted in entertainment is not that. It could be, so it's not that we have to depict it the way we do, but we're so heavily focused on being entertained and on music and on things that are fun and light that we tend not to get that piece of it. And I mean, the flip side is that's kind of general media in the sense that it is about entertainment and reality television and all of that. But that's kind of the short answer.
Yeah, well, and I guess I'm concerned that, Black Entertainment Network is BET, so perhaps I've lost credibility there. but I'm concerned, and my brother just gets ballistic about this, that how are we presenting ourselves? Why we have a cable channel, which when I always turn, I never see any focus on the education, how we're achieving the success. We have an opportunity to put those stories out there, and we're not doing it. And even in the larger media, African Americans who are anchors and news reporters, I think they're going to have to fight some of that fight too and raise the roof that there should be a focus on black men in particular getting educated, because that is so rarely mentioned in our society. So I think maybe writing these different news organizations, if you know of black anchors and news reporters, contacting them and ask why aren't they doing stories that reflect black men doing the positive things like getting educated, and BET in particular.
And I'd add to that, the other piece is it is kind of supply and demand, and when you are writing things and submitting things, they're turning things down left and right. So when something does get through, support it. And like they say, if it's a film, that first weekend counts. If it's a show, watch it. Because if you don't, it goes away. And you can't really say, why didn't they do it? It's like, well, when we did, you didn't pay any attention. So that's another piece.
The perfect example of that was the 106 and gospel that they had. They had focus groups for that, and they considered us critical on the pilot. But then when it came out, we had complaints that they aired it at the wrong time, and then they didn't get any viewers, so they took it away. I completely understand. Thank you.
I think the flip side of what you said, when positive things come out, support it. The flip side of that is when garbage comes out, don't watch it.
Right.
I mean, essentially, it's a supply and demand business. They're about making money. They're not going to continue to air things that aren't making ratings and aren't making money. So it's important not to. It's also important not to support things that are essentially garbage. I've gotten to the point where I don't watch BET at all. I feel like I can't even support the network. Period. So. Yeah,
I'm with you. And unfortunately, we support a lot of the garbage. So that is that's a conference of why we have why do we have those views? Why are we attracted to certain film? Booty Call was certainly celebrated a lot more than Amistad, and
Though strangely, in its defense, it was a safe sex film. I will say.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know.
Well, okay, a redeeming quality.
Dangerous practices.
But it's really where we are, and so we have a lot of education to do with our sisters and brothers who are African American, and what they've been taught and why they feel the way they do about themselves, and that they can appreciate some things and not appreciate others, and the need to have a broader appreciation.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Edgar Petru. I am an alum of Spelman College. And I wanted to thank Professor Lewis because I've waited a long time to hear some of those critiques expressed, especially from a Morehouse man. But I also want to challenge you and want to ask you if you think the fact that such a small percentage of black males are afforded the luxury of a college education, and the fact that our black colleges have to compete with those universities, the Cornells and so forth, and are also charged with preparing our men to fit in mainstream society. And I think, our schools often are torn between preparing people for mainstream society and getting us in positions where maybe we can affect policy, and actually preparing people to serve in our communities, where they're not going to be necessarily in positions of power and have privilege or money or anything else. So if you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out, appreciate it. I think that black schools have a unique opportunity. They have always educated a diverse population. Now, certain black schools have always been more selective, right? If you go back to E. Franklin Fraser's discussion of the black bourgeoisie, he talks about the schools like Morehouse, Hampton, Spelman, which are designed in particular to produce a certain type of middle-class black person, right? And Fraser is critiquing that. I think that here in particular at Morehouse, if we are going to live up to its legacy, right? If this is truly going to be, as President Franklin said, the premier institution for the development of men of African descent, then we have to recognize that, yes, we are competing, but what do we bring that's unique to the table? I think the value that Morehouse has is the ability to develop brothers that can work in the community and corporate America. I don't think the values of strong character are relegated to one single space. However, I think it's much easier if we point to making people acceptable in a corporate environment, right? And I think Morehouse has to address his history of doing that, of supporting middle-class black folks and making sure they move into corporate America, and taking low-income and working-class black folks and not giving them the tools necessarily for success. I think we'll be most competitive when we develop a unique curriculum of social development. That's going to draw folks because you can't get it at Cornell. You can't get it at these other PWIs. You should be able to get it here.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Nolan Jeter, senior psychology major at Morehouse in Philadelphia. And my question is for Dr. Lewis. I know you were just using this example as a frame of reference when you referred to Dr. Martin Luther King when he laughed at the woman. I was just curious, I'm always inquiring, was taught to, what was the context of which he
the basic context was Septima Clark, who was working with the SCLC, was concerned that as King, who was, of course, elected to lead the civil rights movement, was doing all of these very visible demonstrations throughout Alabama. And she was like, well, sisters have been doing all this work. Why don't you guys let some of us lead some of the rallies, right? And literally, as it's recounted, you can find this in particular in Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. The response was laughter, literally. Like, isn't that a cute idea? Let the women lead. Right? And I think, unfortunately, as black men, we have a long-standing tradition of saying, we will let women lead when we get far enough. Right? The whole question of the vote, if you look back in history, Frederick Douglass, who was one of our first identified male black feminists, when it came to the question of should black women get the right to vote, he was like, wait. Right? As soon as black men get the right to vote, right? Because we view, and I say we as men, view the experience of women as connected, except when it comes to getting advancements. Then we say, we'll advance and we'll help you out. I've heard that from other folks, right? I'll make it out the hood, then I'll reach back, right? That strategy I don't think has worked at all. And I think we have to be critical of, about that along gender lines. Because it's 2010. If we still waiting on the right opportunity to move collectively with our sisters, we'll be waiting forever.
But do you think, and I get your point, and just one caveat to that, I would think is it really to a certain point? Because I think that within the black community, obviously we're bathed in hegemony. So, I mean, I think that when we look at kind of the racial oppressiveness that we suffer from still, whether it be we upper, middle, or lower class black folk, we still are engaging and utilizing the tools and the framework of the oppressor. And so I think you might be a little off in saying, and you might even agree with me, in saying that, oh, we'll help you, woman, as soon as we get far enough, or we'll help you, poor black Ashby goer, as soon as we get far enough. Where it really is, dude, I'm rugged individualist. You know what I'm saying? So it seems that, if we're really being honest and speaking truth to power, which seems to be the exercise that we're engaged in here today, that we really have to check ourselves kind of even more holistically in this way.
I fully agree.
And I'll get with you on the dress code in a second.
All right, doctor.
Good afternoon again. My name is Frank Jackson. I'm a senior psychology major from Atlanta, Georgia. You referenced earlier in your talk a portion about how once black males attain a certain level of education, they're actually more likely to be hired or more likely to receive greater dollars. I'd like to know, and I'm not deficit-oriented at all, but I'd like to know, are black males actually achieving that level of education that will afford them that opportunity? And if so, why and under what are those numbers buried? Because you said not to just glaze past the graphs and actually look at the numbers. Why are the numbers so buried, and why is it so hard to actually parse that out?
Yeah, so that's like a methodology question, which I love to talk about. So I'm going to try to figure out how to address it. We are used to dealing with statistics and snapshots, right? That says in 2010, X percent of folks are doing this or that. In order to understand that, you have to look at the the trend data, right, and what's happening. People often point to census estimates, and you can go back on census estimates and see earnings by education, as well as if you look at work by folks like Kerwin Charles, particularly black economists, have been good at disentangling these education trade-offs. If you look at the work of Dalton Conley, Being Black and Living in the Red, he goes painstakingly through and says, what's the impact of education? What's the impact of income? What's the impact of wealth? Now, these are usually book-length arguments, right? And so many folks become turned off because they're also complicated to address, but they're longer arguments than these snapshots. As long as we're fixated on the snapshots, we'll be excited because, of course, the census recently released estimates, and now it's like 31% of folks have college degrees, which is like, woohoo, right? But if we don't do the work that I think like Dr. Clayton and Mr. Patton are doing in the Morehouse Research Institute of disentangling and looking at the experiences of black men in particular, we'll miss the nuance. There is too little value for nuanced work around race and gender. I think we have to increase the value of it because there are divergences, right? There are even regional divergences. What's happening in the South is not what's happening in the North. In the North, black males have an unemployment rate of over 50%, and this is not the first time it's happened, right? So it's different in Chicago, et cetera. So I can give you more references, but they're longer arguments, and I think it's our responsibility as critical consumers to start to dig into them, try to figure out what makes sense, what's changing as well.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gregory Davis. Again, I'm a senior psychology major at Morehouse College, and I have a question for the entire panel about the idea of exclusion and authenticity in the African American community. So, I mean, we can discuss, how valid this claim is, but in my view, if you're seen in any way as not being authentic in being African American, if you're too country, or if you're too hood, if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you act too white, if you're too smart, then you're taken out of the equation as who can be our leaders, or who's really a part of the community. And to me, that divergence in thinking separates us more than it combines us. I just want to know from your different perspectives, from religion, from education, from media, in the idea of gender relations, what are the negative impacts of exclusion from really being truly black, and what are the consequences of those things? Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
I'll throw something out. I kind of think that it's hard to expand the definition of blackness, but it's necessary, right? As a group, we can begin to redefine it. But for me, what helped me understand blackness in a different way was knowing I was black and different, right? Because people will look at you and be like, when you're younger, they're like, oh man, you acting like you this, you stuck up, you're bougie, and that used to get me, and I used to be like, oh dang, I'm not black enough. And then I realized, wow, black people are some of the most amazingly diverse folks on earth. You can't tell me I'm not black because I'm the blackest thing going. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think a strong sense of self helps buffer against people constricting notions of blackness. And the more folks we have who can define themselves positively, the more we'll be able to push the boundaries of blackness out in some ways.
I kind of took your comment a little differently in that you're talking about black leadership.
I'm sorry. Actually, I mean, it was to both of those points. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, so I kind of honed in on that point, which was the black leadership, which is an interesting piece. I think that's kind of why we all got quiet, because we just started to thinking. And it's an interesting idea to consider who has been excluded from leadership because of sexual orientation, because of gender, like the Martin Luther King example, because of being from the Deep South, and so you have a certain accent. And that's a very interesting question, because as you were talking, what I started to think were, well, who are the leaders that come to mind? And in a sense, you're right. They tend to have a certain similarity in the way that they talk, in the way that they appear, and I don't see as much diversity. And I think you may not, I don't think you necessarily see that on the local scene. So I have friends who do union organizing, and so you're going to see a lot more diversity there. But in terms of kind of a broader based or even more national scene, I think you're right, and it's an interesting point. So I don't have an answer, but I'm glad you brought it up, because it is an interesting point about how we define blackness, even in that context, which may be more activist or more scholarly.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there are many pieces to your question and levels, and I think there is a difficulty. And I think the difficulty we have as being a part of a historically black college, that we have been in the business of preparing our students to be successful in a society where we are a minority, and so we are subscribing to standards. And those standards are imposed on us of how we dress, how we speak, all those things. So I think in this, so one piece is how do we live among each other as African Americans, primarily here. Are those exclusions going on here? And certainly I'm concerned if we are not allowing people a diversity of ideology, presentation, even dress, and language. All those things should be, and of course sexual orientation, all of those things. I think the function, it goes back to kind of the function of the university and the college in the black context. When we are preparing our students to go for those interviews in their senior year, to get a contract with Merrill Lynch or wherever, or they're going into media or broadcasting, the reality is there are certain things that are going to be required. And I think Morehouse, and I know having been here many, many years ago, as been pointed out, that there is a tradition of preparing us so that we can be at the table in the same way. So I think that's the pull, that's the rub. We're torn because there can be this kind of acceptance, but when it all comes down to it, the bottom line is, are we going to get our students ready so they can be out there and compete on the same level?
And the further complexity, I think, lies in this issue of what are we being educated toward and what are we being trained for. So I think a lot of what we look at in terms of just institutions of higher education in general are often engaged in, especially by people who've been marginalized or disenfranchised, as an opportunity to get to the American dream, an opportunity to get that brass ring or that gold crown, right, that's placed above our head. But I think that also what becomes important for us to do is to approach things from multiple perspectives, okay? Obviously, the panel that you see in front of you is as diverse as there are individuals in the audience, right? So we all have different perspectives and different orientations and different agendas. But I think that the singular agenda is that we all want to be better. So then the question becomes, okay, how do we push to be better, but still have a singular space within which we can operate that's large enough to encompass us all, right? And that speaks a little bit to, pardon my tangent, but there are a lot of people in my classes here who are familiar with them. That speaks a little bit to the appropriate attire policy, right? Certainly we want to make sure that we have spaces where we are able to express ourselves and to be individuals. I absolutely agree that we need to be individuals. We don't have to ascribe to any one set template, right? I agree with that. But there's also this other interesting thing that I do. I cycle, right? And I I used to do it hardcore when I lived in DC. But, I cycle and I have, my cycling clipless cleats that I wear, and, I have the appropriate cycling pant attire, which is, largely looks like, it is spandex and looks akin to leotard, and I have like a onesie joint that I wear and I put on, and I have a helmet as well, and I have goggles that protect my eyes, and sometimes I put Vaseline in my nose because I go very quickly at times, very, very fast cyclist. So I utilize all those things, all those accoutrements for cycling. But I don't wear them to teach my class. And so the idea for me with respect to the appropriate attire policy is I believe in things within limits. If you look at if you talk to my colleagues, they might say, David, that shirt looks a little bit washed out. If you talk to people who were here when I graduated in 95, 91 to 95, David, you got 2 earrings. That's inappropriate, right? You're trying to get an earring in your nose. How in the world are you going to represent? You're going to go to an Ivy League institution after this and all that kind of stuff. Well, what it was it's my individual expressiveness. There is an extent to which that individual expressiveness, I think, needs to be tolerated and shaped. Now, I'm not suggesting that individuals should not be able to do whatever it is that they want to be able to do, period. However, within any society, there are parameters within which you have to operate and negotiate. Now, Morehouse has set with its appropriate attire policy parameters within which students are accepted to exist. So the thing is that, and this is one thing that I said before, and you've heard me say this before, is that the one thing that I think is so interesting is that there are so many people, and I'm not talking about Dr. Lewis right now, there are so many people from outside of Morehouse's boundaries who have tremendous critique in how to effectively develop and orient strong black males. I think that's so interesting because there's this idea of appropriateness, right? There's this idea of black males should be able to do anything. They should be able to do anything. I should be able to do anything I damn well please, right? But there are still certain parameters within which it is important for me to learn to negotiate. So I think the appropriate tire policy is something, quite frankly, that I believe in, right? Because I think it helps. I think it helps. And if there are individuals who have problems with it, I think first the thing that we need to look at is how do students feel about it? Because there needs to be a student swell if there's a concern. This cat's out in California. You can help me out with this, both of you guys from Berkeley. But when they started raising tuition prices, I didn't need to say, hey, look, hey, it's too much money. That's not fair. They were like, you know what? We're locking it down. So I think that if there is a sincere and dedicated issue with the appropriate tire policy, certainly this is something that is dynamic. And it's something that I think we all need to have dialogue about. But it's not something that's etched in stone. We revisit it. So I think that, again, one thing we said, I had to go back to my slide, it's important for us to challenge one another, to check one another, and certainly important for us to charge one another, right? Mm-hmm. But we have to, we can't be afraid of the pushback. I heard people when, and this is just an educational note here, I heard people when LaRue looked at me, when Dr. Lewis looked at me, people like, ooh, what's Dr. Rice going to do about, that's right here in the Bank of America auditorium. That's what we're supposed to do, man, right? That's why we're here, because we need to push each other around. Mm-hmm. We need to upset the equilibrium. And you all need to know, as students, as faculty, as practitioners, that we come from different spaces, but we're all on the same page in terms of, quite frankly and rawly, liberating our people. And so that's what we have to keep at core, that we're about the business of liberation. There are so many strands and thickets of oppression that surround us that we have to come at it from different perspectives, and that's what we're doing here today. So I know that was a tangent, so excuse me for that. Jacques Corey.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Jacques Cormier.
Congratulations on the Super Bowl win.
Oh, thank you. Jacques Cormier, a senior psychology major from Decatur, Georgia. And thank you, Dr. Rice, for leading in my question. But I know Dr. Lewis touched on it, and I do agree with you in that, wearing dress shoes doesn't mean you'll remember everything else. Oh, wearing dress shoes doesn't mean you'll remember everything else spoken in class. But from the other panelists, how do you all feel? Again, I don't like dwelling on the dress code because, in all honesty, we had a student presidents of a lot of organizations. We met with the guy over student services, and he talked with us about it. And the thing is, it's not like you have to wear suits to class. It's just like you can't wear stuff like when you can't go to McDonald's, you can't wear flip flops. You have to wear a shirt, and you can't wear a do rag, or so it's not like you have to wear a suit every day. But from you all's perspective, how you all feel about it in the sense that, do you feel like it's necessary? Is it too superficial? And also to you, sir, how you feel it would have played out 30 years ago? When you were here.
You all are having a lot of fun with me today. Go ahead. One day you'll be 30 years out if you're lucky. Actually, I think it would have been less controversial because, well, in my day, there was not the baggy jeans. We were wearing now designer jeans. Just a flashback. We had the Calvin Kleins, the Sergio Valenti. So we had designer jeans, which was not a problem. And so part of, I want to say two things about this. It's not about a diversity of dress. It's not about casual dress. It's not about, we were wearing all kinds of things that could be considered crazy clothes during that time. For me, it was where it was modeled. when you, and so thug has been used, that term. Dressing like some of, so there's an interest. What is the interest by modeling that kind of dress? Which that was not happening really very broadly here. That there was this kind of dressing in a thuggish kind of way. So that's one thing. But I want to go back, because this is something Dr. Lewis said, and I want to be clear that a man in a dress, I think a man in a dress can have the greatest of character. And so it's not about character, it's not about being smart if you dress in a certain way. But it's about, and David has already touched on this, appropriate for that setting, or what is standard. So that is what is at issue. It's not, for me, it's not a character issue necessarily. It's about what is appropriate and how we are grooming students for success, or how they will carry themselves in a society that will judge you based on how you're dressed. So that's my issue with this.
Can I add a quick footnote to my comment about wearing a dress? I think it is infantilizing, meaning to make into babies. If a brother is bold enough to wear a dress around Morehouse campus, he's probably aware there's some consequences. He's probably actually signaling and saying something to the community about who they are, how they carry themselves, and looking for reactions, right? We often see that folks are like, we want to teach you how it goes in the world. Every brother who is trans, right, you know what I'm saying? And there's a whole other question of, right, people mistaking being trans for being gay, and Morehouse's larger issues of fear of people labeling this as a gay space, right? But every brother I know who makes that choice, even the brother I know who made it when he was here, when I was here, right? They knew there was something at stake there. And they were saying, let me watch the people react. Do you accept me? Do you not? What do you think? So I'm not sure, right? I think that these brothers, and I can't speak for them, but they probably know what's appropriate. We also have to think about not simply what's appropriate, because appropriate is a nice way of saying the status quo and convention, right? Because when we all get dressed up, as a professor, I want a brother who reads, right? That's who I want in my class. Do you read? Do you read? Granted, now some folks, right, do you read consistently? Right. And by read, I mean all of it. So all y'all in the audience read, not skim. I don't even know what that is, right? So, and the dress, the appropriate dress policy, as I understand, is part of multiple pillars, right, that President Franklin has brought in, right, that is about a whole character development, right? And so I don't want it to exist in isolation. I think too often folks have talked about it like Morehouse is just plucking things from the sky. But I think we are in dangerous waters if we don't equally demonstrate and make public, right, the things that we are doing to develop the fullness and the roundness of black men who attend Morehouse. So that's my footnote.
And I don't think that we're necessarily off base there, because I think I agree with everything you said. And this is where it gets tricky, is that I think that if individuals are bold enough to wear a dress, bold enough to whatever, and they're looking or trying to elicit some type of response, well, then it comes on us to engage them responsibly, right? To engage them responsibly as educators. And this is where it gets tricky, not as trainers, but as educators, to talk to them about the consequences of their behavior, whether that behavior be manifest in dress or otherwise. But I think that what has happened with the appropriate attire policy, and not to belabor the point here, but I think there has been so much hype on kind of this, again, myth of what's going on at the institution, right? Because there aren't and tell me if I'm wrong, but I do teach here, there aren't a whole lot of dudes who have walked around with dresses. Okay, now there certainly aren't now. I'm sure it's constricted, considering there's appropriate attire policy, but that didn't happen. As I experience it, what did happen, and this goes into another point that was made in looking at what does it mean to be a thug and all that kind of stuff, it was the sagging pants. And I agree with the appropriate attire policy because I don't need to see somebody's underwear if they're coming to class. I think it's an inappropriate presentation of self. I think it is. Now, if individuals want to push back at me on that. I welcome it, and I've engaged people before. But I think that therein lies, and again, I think we're in agreement on that point as well, is that it requires us to responsibly take care of one another, responsibly engage one another, responsibly, develop one another. What help me?
Well, I won't speak about Morehouse. I'll speak about Spelman, because we also kind of grapple with dress and their dress codes. If you go in the Science Center, you see a big poster that's like, do not wear this, that, and the other. And we're very clear on certain things. And just at a basic level, as an instructor, it's distracting. I've sat in a class and a girl had a skirt so short that I could see her underwear as I'm teaching from here, and she's way back there. It's a little distracting. So if anything, even if just to kind of create an environment that promotes scholarly engagement and keeps your faculty member from kind of doing this all the time, which is interrupting what's going on, that's the piece that is important to me right now.
I'd like to just put a footnote in. Something has happened that maybe many of you are not aware of. And I would not have been aware of it as much as I am if I had not been invited to preach in one of the large churches in Southwest Atlanta. And I want to just share this because this has impacted Morehouse, our admissions office, and our Office of Institutional Advancement in a way that is very sensitive, and we don't have the privilege of advertising everything that we have to respond to. Things get blown out of proportion that can affect our existence. But I was to preach on a significant anniversary at this church, and there were at least 400 to 500 people in front of me. And the very well-known pastor stood up, and in introducing me, added a statement about how Dr. Franklin had addressed the student body regarding a dress code and had directly spoken to Morehouse men wearing dresses, and that this was discouraged in his speech. The audience responded to that with a standing ovation. Everybody got up.
Sure.
And the people in that audience were some distinguished black professionals in this city, literally run this city. I was startled because I didn't expect that. Well, shaking hands at the end of the service, people were pumping my arm, not just for how they felt about the sermon, but as if I was the chief ambassador from the college and was congratulating through me the president. And when I got back on the campus, I was told by a number of officials that the alumni had phoned into the school significantly saying, if the president doesn't address this, we're going to cease to represent the school as recruiters around the country, and we're not sending any more students, and we're going to cut off the money that we're sending you. And that day at that service, alumni said to me, I guess I can get my checkbook back out. Now that's serious. And they felt that over in the admissions office at a very crucial time when the recruitable pool of qualified black males is shrinking. And we're looking for new areas. Now, I mentioned that, maybe it's obvious to you now, because we don't have the privilege, I've discovered over my 31 years here now, of dealing with controversial issues privately or in isolation, or just intellectually, without the fact that we're doing it, gravitating to the campus, media, sensation. Now, I could keep on talking about this, but I'm deeply concerned. I sent to my office for a book that I've just started reading, edited by Dr. Charles Willey and some others. And the book is titled Grassroots Social Action, Lessons in People Power Movements. And there's a statement in here that I don't think has ever been heard at Morehouse College. The statement was made in 1981 by Hugh M. Gloucester, the 7th president of Morehouse College. And he made the statement about Martin Luther King, Jr., and he called the statement the archetype of an educated person. And you could substitute the archetype of a Morehouse man. And he listed 5 things. I just want to name them and I'll sit down. The archetype of an educated person, academic achievement, professional success, personal integrity, social concern, worthy of emulation by all. How do you get to that like King did? Seemingly emphasizing race thought more often than I think we should.
That's the dean of the chapel right there, Dean Carter, everybody, just in case you didn't know. Dr. Hewitt, help us out, please.
You know, I'd like to return to an issue that was brought up by my brother from Clark Atlanta University. It was stated that here at Morehouse, when referring to the institution, it's often she or her. And the question was raised, well, couldn't a man be perceived as caring and nurturing? But the interesting thing about seeing an institution as having feminine qualities is that there's really, if we follow what I believe is the greatest African sociologist, Cheikh Anta Diop, one of the things he points out to us is that gender in the African world has always been more balanced. And in fact, what it seems to me when I hear that is that that's one of the few remaining bastions where the feminine is used where it might not be used. For instance, Africa is always a motherland, and Germany is always a fatherland. And there's significance to that, deep significance to that. So I think that we need to be, one of the things I think will help us in our gender relations is to look at what the African and African American can mean to us. And one of the things that I'd like to suggest is that the relationships, is that we think of fatherhood, but we ignore all these other relationships. What is the relationship of the son to the mother? We think that's a throwaway. He's a mama's boy. We throw that away in America, but in Africa, it's fundamental. He's somebody's brother, right? The sister and the brother. These are fundamentals. But in Western society, those are throwaways. So I'd like to ask the panel if they have considered more of the African tradition and what significance they find in that.
I'll chime in because Dr. Black asked that question in particular, in full disclosure, because I was initiated in African rites of passage with him. And he always stresses the mother-father principle and the ways in which traditional African societies had a greater balance in gender. I have my own praxis in terms of thinking about the ways in which institutions or things we identify as masculine and feminine. And for me, individually, I often like to flip the switch and push the extreme so that folks who are so used to calling this a him or a her will be like, really? So I have a standard practice of saying, God bless me, she's great. And folks go, whoa, yeah. Right?
Good.
People are very, folks will concede that God may not have a gender, but they're unwilling to call God she when they are willing to call God he.
Yes.
So in the spirit of responding to that, I thought about that, and I was like, well, let's call Morehouse him, as well, so that we can recognize the quality of nurturing is universal, or it should be universal across gender. These gender constructs are very much those things that we become steeped in these Western nations and use them to define what the black community looks like. That's the problem there. So I tip my hat and commend you on that point, because it is excellently stated.
Ditto.
I think I know we're going to need to wrap up here. And certainly I invite you all to stay a bit after, engage our panelists one-on-one. I want to say two things before we close. The first thing is that one of the lines that I drew through the conversations that we had today was this idea of violence. And it was helped to be brought home by Dr. LaRue in the very end, when he was talking about not just physical violence, but intellectual violence. Or, Bulhan talks about this idea of violence as the violation of any type of personal integrity, to Dean Carter's point. It seems that we have to be careful of the type of psychological violence that we engage in, and that we in any way, whether it be conscious or unconscious, are complicit in, whether it be upon ourselves or upon others. Certainly this idea of hypermasculinity hurts not only the psyche of self, but the psyche of other, obviously, right? This objectification of women, or the placing of other, of anyone who doesn't conform to ideals, is tricky. And we want to make sure that we don't engage in that type of violence either. And certainly when we look at an educational space, when we're looking at this conceptualization of academic disengagement, if we are in any way complicit in that, we are violating a personal integrity that goes back ancestor before ancestor before ancestor. So we need to be careful of that. I think that today we certainly have heeded Dr. Franklin's call to upset the equilibrium. I want to thank Dr. Franklin for being bold enough to have these great thinkers here today, because certainly he did know who all these people were, and he had an idea of what they were going to be talking about. And I think that certainly his progressive mind is an indicator of the great steps forward that Morehouse is taking. And then finally, I just want to say, obviously, thank you to Dr. Clayton, who allowed me a lot of latitude in working with the panelists and bringing that together as well. He's going to close out with some remarks. But finally, one thing that I do want to say is that I am tremendously moved and love every single one of these people here on this panel. And the back and forth that we had today just deepens that love that I have for them. So I really want to thank them for sitting here for 4 hours and going back and forth and trying to help us get to a better space. So I thank everyone so much, and Dr. Clayton, if you want to come up and close for us, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, I want to thank David for putting together a good panel, and I think he did an excellent job of moderating it. Mm-hmm. And when we have discussions like this, it reminds me of what the Academy is all about. Mm-hmm. You know, nothing better than hearing people talk and knowing what they're talking about and basing it in fact, and no one is, you can disagree, but you can disagree cordially. I've been getting text messages from Dr. Franklin. The board is meeting and he's not able to come back over. But you heard him say earlier that he was learning how to tweet. He's been tweeting out there. So he told me to tell you that, and there's a lot of tweets going, is that the correct word?
Yes, that's right.
A lot of tweets going on out there. The streaming is getting a lot of attention, and they're just about out of tape on the camera there. So with that in mind, thanks for coming. Again, thanks for all of the panelists here, and I've really enjoyed it. Take care, be safe. And if you want to talk to the panelists informally for a few minutes, if they have time, please do so. Thanks.